In 2009, I sat down with national demographic data and started tracking birth rate patterns across the United States. What I found was clear. Birth rates for Mexican, Spanish-speaking, and Asian populations were growing at rates between 120 and 250% faster than white and black birth rates, while black birth rates stayed slightly ahead of white birth rates. I published those numbers because I saw what was coming, a demographic shift that would move through public K through 12 schools and hit the front doors of colleges and universities. That is no longer a forecast. Federal education data and census numbers show that for the first time in U.S. history, more than half of the population, under 21 years old, are people of color. Welcome to episode 10 of season 3 of The Cultural Context of Knowledge. I am Dr. Donald Easton-Brooks. For 9 episodes, we focused on ethnic matching in elementary and high school classrooms. We looked at student test scores, teacher retention, and state policies. Today we step past the K through 12 Schoolhouse door and look at higher education. Back in season 2, we talked about another major shift in higher education. After the 1970s women's rights movement and Title IX, female college graduates surpassed male graduates for the first time. That changed campus demographics forever. Now higher education is at another turning point. The early civil rights movement of the 1960s and 70s pushed for access. The goal was to open doors so students from marginalized communities could get into college. Disparities still exist, but access alone is no longer the main problem. Students of color are enrolled at almost every college and university in the country. The problem now is belonging and cultural responsiveness. And that problem collides directly with campus cultures built over generations. Most research on ethnic matching stays in K through 12. That makes sense. The data was gathered in elementary and secondary schools, where the gap between majority student of color classrooms and an 80% white teaching force was easiest to measure. School boards and state leaders focused their policies there. But ethnic matching does not stop at high school graduation. In the second edition of my book, Ethnic Matching, Chapter 5 is titled Ethnic Matching, Beyond PK through 12, Higher Education. In that chapter, I wrote about what I saw during my own years as a professor. The students who find their way to my office hours are almost always the ones who look like me. They walk in tentatively and then relax when they sit down. They tell me things they say they cannot tell their other professors. I understand what that means, and I do not take it lightly. When a student of color walks into a faculty office and sees a professor who shares their background, the dynamic changes immediately. The tentative step becomes a moment of relief. The student stops spending mental energy code switching or explaining who they are, and starts talking about their work. Shared racial and cultural identity between an educator and a learner creates trust and high expectations. That works in a university lecture hall or advising office just as well as it does in a third-grade classroom. In higher education, ethnic matching shows up in 3 distinct areas: classroom teaching, academic advising, and faculty mentorship. Classroom teaching. College students of color who have professors of color participate more in class and report higher engagement. When a Mexican professor understands code switching, or an indigenous professor understands tribal sovereignty, or an Asian professor understands different communication styles, students do not have to pay an extra tax just to be understood. They focus on the course material. Academic advising and retention. Advisors decide which courses students take, which majors they pick, and how they handle financial or academic stress. Data shows that Black, Indigenous, Mexican, and Spanish-speaking and Asian college students who have advisors with shared cultural backgrounds stay in school and graduate at higher rates. Culturally connected advisors do not start from a place of deficit. They know the family expectations and real-world pressures students carry outside the classroom. Faculty mentorship and graduate school. Getting through college and into graduate school relies on mentorship. For Black male undergraduates, having a Black male professor or department chair provides advice and practical knowledge that is rarely passed down across racial lines. That mentorship is how research opportunities, academic standards, and professional contacts get handed to future scholars. We need to talk about what happens to faculty of color once they get hired. K through 12 teachers of color pay a diversity tax. In higher education, professors of color pay a severe tenure tax. Universities recruit them with press releases. Once they arrive, department chairs overload them with committee assignments, equity tasks, and unofficial student advising. When a college only has 2 or 3 Black, Mexican, and Spanish-speaking, or Native professors, every student of color goes to their office for help, and every university task force demands their name on the roster. They do the invisible emotional labor that keeps students from dropping out. But when tenure review comes, promotion committees grade them only on narrow citation numbers and grant dollars. They ignore the campus work that kept the university's retention numbers alive. On top of that, professors of color who research ethnic matching, racial equity, or critical pedagogy run into institutional resistance. Senior colleagues often call their work niche or subjective, while treating traditional Eurocentric research as neutral. Hiring more faculty of color without changing tenure rules, protecting their research, and balancing committee work is a trap. It reproduces the exact problems institutions claim they want to solve. Ethnic matching in college cannot stop at assistant professors and advisors. It has to reach department chairs, deans, provosts, and university presidents when Black, Mexican, and Spanish-speaking, Indigenous, and Asian leaders hold executive roles. Campus policies change. Leaders from marginalized backgrounds understand how university rules affect students and faculty of color. They set up cluster hiring, adjust tenure rules to count community research, and build actual support networks instead of empty diversity statements. The demographic shift I tracked in 2009 is here. More than half of the U.S. population, under 21, are people of color. Universities can keep running 20th century staffing models that mismatch their students, or they can build modern campus structures that put ethnic matching to work across teaching, advising, mentorship, and leadership. Now let us trace this movement past university graduation and into the workforce. College students do not stay on campus forever. They graduate and enter corporate offices, healthcare systems, engineering firms, tech companies, and government agencies. And when they step out of higher education, they encounter the exact same dynamics in the workplace that they experienced in the classroom. The research on workplace diversity is clear, and the numbers are hard to argue with. Over the past decade, McKinsey & Company tracked thousands of companies across 15 countries. Their data showed that companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity in executive leadership are 36% more likely to outperform their industry peers in profitability. Companies in the bottom quartile for diversity fell behind their peers by 27%. Diversity in leadership is not decorative. It directly changes financial results. Boston Consulting Group ran a separate study looking at innovation. They found that companies with diverse management teams generate 19 percentage points higher revenue from new products and services than companies with homogeneous leadership. Why? Because teams with different cultural backgrounds approach problems differently. They question assumptions that single culture teams miss, and they spot market needs that traditional executive teams overlook. The workforce data on employee retention and job satisfaction tells the exact same story. Workplace studies by Gallup and Deloitte show that when employees work in environments with managers and leaders who share or understand their cultural background, voluntary employee turnover drops by 22%. Overall team engagement jumps by more than 80%. Why does that happen? Because when a young black engineer, a Spanish-speaking accountant, or an indigenous healthcare worker enters a company and sees leaders who look like them, the exact same relief occurs that happens during university office hours. The employee does not have to spend energy defending their legitimacy or dealing with microaggressions. They feel seen, they stay longer, and they produce better work. Conversely, when companies recruit diverse talent without building culturally responsive leadership, they pay a corporate diversity tax. Turnover spikes within the first 3 years. Talented employees of color leave for competitors who value their perspective, taking institutional knowledge and revenue potential with them. Ethnic matching is not just a concept for K through 12 schools or university lecture halls. It is an economic reality for the entire workforce. The colleges that build belonging today are feeding the companies that will lead the market tomorrow. Ethnic matching reaches far past K through 12 classrooms, through higher education, and directly into the global workforce. Across every stage of learning and career growth, shared cultural background between leaders and teams affects belonging, retention, and performance. Next week is our Season 3 finale of The Cultural Context of Knowledge. In Episode 11, we look ahead. I will share the new research agenda we need in this field, along with the culturally responsive scorecards and diagnostic tools I developed to help school boards, superintendents, and university leaders measure and build real equity infrastructure. Join us next week for Episode 11 as we close out Season 3 and look at the work ahead.